Woohoo! It's time for positive action! Hola! Es hora de acción positiva! Positiva! Boys and girls, welcome to Tuck In Tuesday. Hey, Miss Shayma and Miss Angie are here for a special feature through our summer months where we get to read a book with a positive partner and you. Why? Because you are important, you are wonderful, and you are unique. And we're so excited to read a story with you. Check out all these great books. And just in case you're a Camp Moco kid, you're going to get to hear lots of great books over the summer and during the day at Camp Moco too. Here we are, the Morgan County Library. Let's go inside and read a book. Yes! Want to come with us? Yeah, come on. Yeah, here we go.
Okay. Hello there, Morgan County students. How are you today? I'm Miss Will, and I'm excited to share my favorite book with you, with our young scholars of Morgan County. You are unique, you are important, and you are wonderfully made. So here we go. I have a story here for you. Let me put my glasses on because, I can't see without them. There we go. It's called The Camping Trip That Changed America. Theodore Roosevelt, John Muir, and our national parks. A little bit of history in there for you. Okay. Teddy and Johnny. They didn't have much in common, but they shared the love of the outdoors. They both loved a good story too. And that was enough to change America. Theodore Roosevelt's family called him Teddy since he was a boy. He grew up in one of the oldest, richest families in New York City. Teddy was short and brawny, with a fashionable mustache. He loved the outdoors, hunting, fishing, and riding horses. He attended law school before becoming a politician. Theodore Roosevelt became the youngest president of the United States and lived with his wife and 6 children in the White House in Washington, D.C. Now, John Muir's family, they had called him Johnny since he was a tiny boy. He grew up in the Midwest, the son of a poor immigrant farmers. Johnny was tall, thin, and quiet, with a shaggy hair that curled into a long beard. He loved the outdoors, studying, sketching, and writing about plants. He liked the American wilderness alone and wrote about his travels. John Muir became a world-famous naturalist and the protector of wild places with special love for the Yosemite Wilderness near the farmhouse in California. White House, March 1903. That was a really long time ago. Teddy settled into his favorite chair. He loved to end the day reading, just like we're doing. Tonight, he chose a book by John Muir. Muir's adventures in California's Sierra Mountains sounded just about perfect. See, I make mistakes too. About perfect for the busy president. It was strange then, when Muir ended his story by asking for help. Help for trees? He said the wild forest was vanishing. He called on the government to save them. The president thought those mountains forests for a long time. Most people, even his own experts, thought America had so much wilderness that it couldn't ever be used up. Was John Muir right? Could the forest disappear? How could the government help? As president, Teddy needed answers. Roosevelt wrote John Muir a letter. The president was planning a long trip to the western states. He asked John Muir to take him camping in California's Yosemite Wilderness at the end of the trip. If America's forests needed help, the president wanted to see those trees for himself. Roosevelt's train stopped in the cities and towns along its route toward Yosemite. At each stop, bands played, officials gave speeches, and people crowded the platform to catch a glimpse of the popular president the newspaper nicknamed Teddy. May 15th, 1903. The train reached the end of the line in the small town of Raymond, California, about 30 miles outside of Yosemite's wilderness. When he found men sending his baggage to the best hotel in town, Roosevelt shouted, "By George, I'm going camping! Pack me one small sack!" Along with a crowd of officials, townspeople, newspapermen, and photographers, John Muir waited to meet the president. Looks like he had to wait a long time. Teddy shook Johnny's hand. "I've enjoyed your stories, Muir." The president spoke a few words to the crowds. Then he joined Muir in a waiting stagecoach. They didn't have cars then. They bumped along the road up to Yosemite. Another stop, more speeches. Muir was growing impatient. Didn't the president want to see the wilderness? The Roosevelt's voice boomed. "Enough pictures! Folks, I'd like to see the rest of the country in peace." The president sent his men ahead to set up camp, leaving the shocked crowd behind. Teddy and Johnny rode off alone on horses. I feel like a runaway schoolboy. Teddy laughed as his horse galloped along. It's a nice picture. Boy, this one's a little odd. Interesting trees. They stopped near a family of giant sequoias in the Mariposa Grove. I think I said that right. Surrounded by the trees of this ancient forest, for once, Teddy was quiet. When he looked up, he couldn't see the treetops. The sequoias soared straight to the heavens. "These trees grew up when the Egyptians built the pyramids," said Johnny. "They are the largest living thing on Earth. They never stop growing unless you cut them down." That night, under the branches of towering sequoias, a sequoia called the Grizzly Giant, Teddy lay on the 40 thick wool blankets his men prepared. Doesn't sound like camping to me. Johnny made a bed from some branches and wrapped himself in an old cloth from his sack. He told Teddy the funny story of meeting his first bear. "I once saw a bear in a meadow. Now bears are shy creatures, so I jumped up from behind a tree just to see him run away. The bear looks up. I ran towards him shouting and waving. I finally stopped, or I would have run right into him. The bear rose up, but his claws on a log between us and glared. I'd made a big mistake about shy bears. I had to stand perfectly still for hours or I would have been bitter. Finally, the bear rambled off, checking back over his hind end to make sure I stayed put. That bear and I were both scared and embarrassed, but I tell you, it was the bear that had the better manners." Teddy laughed. "Was it a grizzly bear?" he asked. Johnny shook his head. "The only grizzly bear left in Yosemite today is the old tree. Hunters shot the last bear a few years ago." May 16th, 1903. The next day, Teddy and Johnny rode high into the mountains, trading stories the way friends do. As the horse plowed through the drifts of snow, they reached a peak called Glacier Point. "Glaciers carved this whole valley," said Johnny. Spreading his arms, he lay down on the slab of granite and inched along on his back to show how a massive river of slow-moving ice carved the rock beneath them millions of years ago. They camped high above the valley floor. Johnny made a president bed of branches, and they settled near the fire for warmth. Johnny began his story. This whole continent is a great garden. Before the beginning of time, ancient seas covered the land, churning the rocks into soil. As the sea dried up, volcanoes sculpted mountains and valleys. Glaciers carved rivers and created plains. Trees and flowers grew in forests and meadows. Wild birds and beasts filled the land. Everywhere nature sang her melody. Can you hear it? My children should see this place, said Teddy. I hope it is still here for them, said Johnny. Under the trees, Teddy and Johnny slept. May 17th, 1903. Overnight, a storm blew in, spreading 5 inches of fresh snow. Teddy and Johnny woke up under a coverlet of white flakes. They shook themselves off like 2 old grizzly bears. Bully, said Teddy, stretching. What a glorious day. On horseback, Muir and Roosevelt rode down into the famous Yosemite Valley. The granite formations towered above them. They passed the sheared cliff of Half Dome and the fierce face of El Capitan arising from the valley floor. On their last night together, John Muir talked to the president about life in the wilderness. People were destroying wild land to make money from it. Ranchers cleared forests, prospectors mined gold, and companies planned to build hotels and shops throughout the valley. There was no one to stop them. If they keep building, the wilderness won't last another 10 years, said Muir. Well, how can I help? asked the president. Keep it wild, Muir said, and protect it forever. Think the president can do that? Together, Teddy and Johnny imagined a different future for America. What if everyone owned the wilderness? What if both rich and poor could spend time out in the open? What if we could save the forests for all of the children to come? Well, America's Wilderness, 1903 and beyond. Teddy left Johnny in Yosemite and headed back home. His time in the forest turned the outdoor-loving president into one of nature's fiercest protectors. Roosevelt pushed Congress to pass laws saving the wilderness. He failed at first, but that didn't stop him. He created national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and national forests. With John Muir's spirit as his guide, Theodore Roosevelt saved more wild land than any president in history. Teddy and Johnny never spent any time together again. Teddy traveled the world, but called the night of the snowstorm the one day of my life that I will always remember with pleasure. Johnny felt the same. He wrote that he fairly fell in love with the president. They exchanged personal letters for the rest of their lives. John Muir lies under the cedar trees he planted near his home in Martinez, California. Theodore Roosevelt lies beneath a sugar maple in the Roosevelt family plot in Oyster Bay, New York. For all time, under the trees, Teddy and Johnny slept, and their shared spirit protects our wilderness forever. The end.
Awesome. What a
Did
great
you
story.
like that book? Wasn't that awesome? My Morgan County scholars. Remember, you are unique. You're important. You are wonderfully made. Now, go brush your teeth.
Perfect.
I am a positive action kid. That's what I am.